Hello, Tom LaVecchia here with the New Theory podcast, and this is a very, very special one for me, and I want to give a proper introduction as it is deserved. Today, we have David Brown, who is the host of Wondery's podcast, the number one business podcast on iTunes, as far as I'm concerned, in the world, for Business Wars. David, welcome to the New Theory podcast. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing just fine. Thanks for taking some time to talk with us about this. I love this. I love this whole series of episodes on Marvel and DC. You must be a comic books fan.
Well, I am a comic books fan, but here's what's interesting. I actually want to start off what initially caught my eye was Netflix versus Blockbuster, and I want to preface a little bit where now hindsight's 20/20, but I'm an 80s guy, and I didn't see it coming. So, doing the research and doing the podcast, where did you start to see cracks in the Blockbuster's armor versus Netflix?
Well, back when Blockbuster was, it was number one, I was working for a public radio program called Marketplace, and some of your listeners may know that show. It's still on the air, and it's one of the PRI shows. It's part of the whole NPR stream of news programs every day. So Blockbuster pretty much seemed like it was unbeatable, and I think we can all remember how we used to, on a Friday night or maybe a Thursday night, if we wanted to get a start to the weekend, we would race down to the Blockbuster and spend half an hour looking for a DVD or a VHS tape, and spend some time in the new releases, and the place was really packed, and you'd wait in line for it. You remember that? I mean, you say you were a child of the 80s.
I not only remember it, I remember scurrying back so I didn't get the late fees.
Yeah, exactly. There's that. But if you recall, a lot of people don't remember this. Netflix, as we now know it, was not what Netflix was in those early days. Netflix was this service where you could keep the DVD as long as you wanted to and avoid those late fees you were talking about. And you could send it in when you were good and ready, after you were done watching the movie. And a lot of people appreciated that innovation. And I think what was the signal of Blockbuster's demise right there was that Netflix was operating from the standpoint of what is it that the consumer wants? And that was their real insight throughout. It was that consumers really didn't like the late fees. They just it was seen as a tax on convenience in a sense. And so Blockbuster failed to react just on those that basic level with those early DVDs. And I think the folks at Netflix really understood right then that Blockbuster was vulnerable in a much larger sense. And so as Netflix looked at new delivery models that were made possible by the internet, Blockbuster sat on its hands. They were very comfortable being the king of video, and they didn't imagine that one day we would all have broadband and speeds of 24 gigs. I mean, that was unthinkable. That sort of thing was unfathomable. So the revolution, in a sense, Blockbuster lost because it failed to think about how people use it. It was more thinking about how to maintain its position than anything else.
Now, I love the content of the show, and folks, I was on David prior to us jumping on. We chatted a little bit, but I'm a fanboy. I'm a huge fan of yours, and part of a great job that you do is your monologue, changing of the voices, and so forth. And you do an excellent job at that. It's not easy to do. And then there's a part when I think it was named Santiago where Netflix approached Blockbuster with a really robust offer at $300 or $200 per user, which would have been big money, and they could at least walked away with some money and kind of kept a relationship and maybe merged or did something more profound later. Why do you think Blockbuster turned down that deal, which is basically idiotic from today's standpoint?
Well, hubris. I mean, that's the short answer is hubris. Blockbuster was a Dallas-based company, and they thought that they could do it better than anyone else. I mean, after all, they really did create a new model for video rental. And when Netflix came out with, their change to the model for distribution of movies, Blockbuster figured it was a simple matter of replicating what Netflix was doing. All they had to do was have a blue version of Netflix's red website. And literally they, sent in spies. They tried to copy the warehouse model of Netflix back in the DVD days, and then they tried to duplicate the streaming model in a similar way, but they just couldn't pull it off. Now, what Blockbuster I think lacked was a kind of imagination about how it was that people wanted to be served. They really were thinking much more like a business and much less like a user, and that was their undoing.
That's interesting. So we obviously knew Netflix came out on top on that one. Now, so we're going to get to the other ones, but the second one, I listened to it. I loved it. I told him I'm a huge fan of yours. We had Hernan on the show. He's Hernan Lopez is the executive director, CEO, and you guys are just a good group of guys. We're going to talk about how podcasting and audio swinging back. On the second one, my only critique was, I listened to it, and you guys seem really heavy on the Adidas story, and versus, the Phil Knight story was also in there. And It just looked like there wasn't a clear winner in terms of the narrative of the show. I walked away with, hey, it looks like Nike won because they still have, big share in the U.S. and Adidas kind of grew and it's not over. But I didn't hear a clear winner on that. What was your take on who was a winner from that one? Because that was a one out of the three that I listened to where it was a little bit of scratch in my head.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you. If you had not listened to Business Wars, who would you say is the winner of Nike and Adidas?
I would have said Nike, and then after listening, I would have said Nike, but put an asterisk that Adidas was a respectful second place.
And I would say, ding, 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 ding. I think you're a winner. I think you've absolutely got it. I think that really is where it is. I mean, look, let's face it. Once upon a time, Adidas was king of the hill, and it was the dominant force in sneakers. And when Nike came along, nobody really thought that this guy who was basically rebranding shoes from Japan would ever really be a driving force in the shoe business, much less driving force in pop culture, which is really, I think, the key to the Nike-Adidas war. It's understanding its role, its relevance in pop culture. And so if you think of it in those terms, go down to the shopping mall, or ask some high schooler, who is it, Nike or Adidas? And while you'll have aficionados, sure. I mean, you'll have fans of Air Jordan and that sort of thing. The truth of the matter is there's respect all the way around, and in part because Nike and Adidas really have fought tooth and nail to try to remain relevant in this landscape. And now, what I would say too is that Nike has had more savvy when it comes to branding and I think celebrity endorsements than Adidas has. But Adidas has actually, historically speaking, had I think arguably more savvy when it comes to the advancement and development of the shoe itself. And one of the smart things that Adidas did, and we talk about in Business Wars, was that it, in a sense, returned to its roots by saying, look, this is an athlete shoe. This is not a showboat shoe. This is an athlete shoe. And if you're a celebrity and you want to embrace the athleticism, then you'll get us. You'll understand us. Now, that comes at a cost, right? I mean, I think that part of the sneaker wars is the fact that Nike understood that, the celebrity aspect, the pop culture aspect, in a way that the Germans, at the time, Germans at Adidas, just simply did not grasp. Nike had that Hollywood idea. And so is it a clear win for Nike? No, it's not. Nike definitely pulled ahead of Adidas, definitely, and there's no question about it in the United States. And yet, Adidas remains an important force in the sneaker market, in the shoe market, athletic shoe market, certainly in Europe and other parts of the globe. But in the number one market, the United States, Nike still reigns. And so it's Nike with an asterisk, as you put it. I think that's right.
Okay, now you mentioned Hollywood, which brings us to the third rubber match of the show.
Yeah.
And I know more is coming out, and then when I get to a little bit about you. So this is a biggie, and this is why I kind of wanted John, where Marvel versus DC. Now, again, I want to preface this. I'm a Marvel guy.
Okay.
And I had a keen interest because back then, I want to say 95 or so, I bought Marvel stock at $2 or whatever, went up to $5.
Wow.
And I really felt what happened to Marvel was going to happen to Marvel, but it was a Ron Perlman error where he basically drove it into the ground. I got useless warrants, and then the new regime took over as a new company, and all the shareholders got left holding the bag. But then they materialized it over – over 30 years or 15, 20 years or so, right? A little 23 years now. So with that being said, now, guys, you have to, and gals, you have to listen to all three, but if you listen to anyone, you need to listen to the DC Marvel War. and David does a fantastic job with his monologue. So let's boil that down. So Marvel shouldn't have won. DC should have just pounced them and destroyed them. So what did DC, do right or Marvel do wrong, or vice versa? What did DC do wrong and Marvel do right?
Well, I think there's a common thread as you go through some of these, and a lot of it is hubris, and a lot of it is wanting to cling to the successes of the past. When DC got started, its big success, as I think everyone listening knows, its big success was Superman early on, and that was 1938. And about that time, a lot of other, wannabe DCs, if you will, emerged on the scene, and Marvel was one of them. 1939 was when Marvel got started. And their earliest characters were Submariner and Human Torch, and the one that really took off was Captain America. But what this did was this created an opportunity for the creative types within the industry in New York City. We're talking about the Jack Kirbys, for example, and the Stan Lees, and of course the people who wanted to be the next Bob Kane, the creator of Batman. Or the Jerry Siegel. We're talking about people who, saw the emergence of the Marvels of this world, and there were more than one of those competitors to DC. Saw the emergence as an opportunity to sort of leverage their own talent, and that's what they did. Stan Lee really got his start at Marvel early on, and Marvel was very much a kind of imitative product for a long time.
Correct.
And it really wasn't until right around 1960 when Stan Lee was really rethinking his personal career trajectory that he was ready to leave Marvel, and he had been with the company for a long time. And he heard then about the Justice League of America. DC was much more buttoned down, and than certainly than it is today, and certainly more buttoned down than Marvel would become. But it was at this juncture when Stan Lee's wife effectively said, "Stan, what do you want to do with your life? Do you really want to leave comic books, or do you want to take it to that next level where no longer are you just having like if you think about the Justice League, where you have all the same superheroes in a room together taking on the bad guys. Don't you want to create characters with human dimension, characters that we would recognize as human beings and not as superheroes?" Now, that's really pretty counterintuitive if you're talking about comic books, which, the bread and butter was the superhero business.
Correct.
Making those superheroes human, that was a radical departure. And throughout, from the moment that Stan Lee decided, no, I'm going to make a left turn here, he continued to make left turns. DC didn't have editorial pages, but shoot, Marvel did. And Marvel made fun of DC in those editorial pages. That was the way that Stan Lee took it throughout. So, to me, and by the way, when Marvel took over in terms of circulation in 1972, there was no turning back, right? Except for a couple of spotty times, DC never regained the lead. And I think it's telling that what I draw from it is that DC really wanted to maintain its gilded offices in Manhattan. And again, it was not thinking about the user as much as it was thinking about the business. And the business, at the end of the day, is the user. If you're not giving the user what they want, they're going to look for it until they find it. And, you know, you think about Apple. I mean, we haven't even talked about Apple because we haven't done a business wars thing on Apple yet, but we are starting to move into some computer wars on business wars. And you think about how you know, there were MP3 players around before the iPod, but you don't have an MP3 cast. You have a podcast, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that alone says something about how Apple reinvented it by giving the people an elegant interface, something that they didn't even realize that they wanted. And that's what you consistently see through Nike, through Marvel, through Netflix. It's these innovators who see what the consumers want before they even recognize it.
You bring a great point, and this guy's a pro because he just you know, we literally hours and hours he summarized hours and hours of content and hundreds of years of business combined. So I love how you summarize everything. So now to go to mediums now. You bring a great point, a great segue. So, like, is there going to be, you know, podcasts or audio versus TV? So here's the thing, right? And again, I want to preface this. Radio is dead, right? Traditional radio, terrestrial radio is dead. However, audio is back. And I don't know if you follow Gary Vaynerchuk, but he says audio is a new end cap. You know, the new Walmart end cap. Why? Because you're going to have Amazon or Google Home in your house. You're going to use your voice. Your voice search is huge on SEO and all that kind of fun stuff at Google. And lastly, podcasts as a medium are being consumed 10x, 100x than what it was, because we're just consuming content differently. So, you know, so why is that, as a traditional radio guy, now as a podcaster, so why is that? And number two is radio, you know, what is it, radio killed the, TV killed the radio star? Will radio
kill the radio star, yeah.
Yeah. Will radio or audio kind of take over video? What do you think?
Well, let me here's what I would say to all of that. There was a terrific book that was written back at the turn of the century that was called Mediamorphosis. Okay. And one of the observations that was made in that book was that every time a new form of media comes out, whether you're talking about film or television or radio or what have you, there's always that narrative that is, you know, for instance, television has killed film. When was the last time you went to see a movie at the theater?
Very, very, very few. Just my kids. Outside of that, not much.
Right. I mean, you know, what I'm saying is films aren't dead. They definitely aren't dead. And in fact, the studios are churning them out for not just the theaters. They're churning them out for the Netflixes, right? They're churning them out for television. They're churning them out for other platforms. The truth is, video never really killed the radio star. The radio star continued, and video continued to do well as too. What happens is media metamorphosizes, if you will. What it does is it becomes complementary. And I think, let me throw something out here. I don't know how many of your listeners, or maybe perhaps you, have Uverse, for example. AT&T has a cable service called Uverse. And on this cable service, as on many other cable services, you know what I'm talking about, Uverse?
Yeah, I heard of it. I'm in Comcast land, but I've heard of Uverse, yes.
There you go. Well, perhaps you have this in Comcast land as well. From channel 0 to 100, say, you have broadcast television. On channels 100 to 200, at least on Uverse, you have a lot of the TBS-type programs, the reruns. On channels 200 to 300, you'll have news and current affairs and maybe some history channels. From 300 to 400, you have kid stuff. From 400 to 500, you have music and entertainment, the Kardashians and all that. Yeah. And this goes on until you get to the 1000s. So we have a lot of content. Well, I'm a 200 guy. See, I pretty much park myself at the 200s, right? So when I get into my car, radio serves the purpose of being a kind of a, I don't know, kind of like the audio books have served the purpose of readers. You can't read while you're driving, but you turn on your radio and you listen to that. So for me, this radio is for the 200s. Is radio dead? Well, not according to the numbers that I see. Radio's not dead at all. Is hit music radio dead? Well, it's lost a lot of listeners to Spotify, that's for sure.
Correct.
So, I mean, I don't know. I think that for those users who use radio for news, the numbers say quite the opposite. But for those who use radio for music, it seems to have gone the way of, well, I won't say it's gone the way of the dinosaur, but it looks like it's heading that direction if you look at the numbers. So I think it depends on how you use that medium is what I'm trying to get at. Do I think podcasts have killed radio? I don't. I think podcasts are marvelously useful for a certain group of people. Maybe it's the 300s, maybe it's the 100s, maybe it's the 200s. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. But what I'm saying is that for that subset of people, that podcast serves this fills this real important need that they have. And so are podcasts going to die? No. But I think it would be a mistake to assume that, just like television didn't kill off the movies, that podcasts will kill off radio. Podcasts are great and they're fun, and it's great to be able to interact with listeners and fans. Like we're doing right now, we're talking with people who are into podcasts, and that's an exciting whole new landscape. I'm not sure that the competition models, I'm not sure that that's well sorted out, or sorted out at least enough for me to fully understand, who's king.
True. And Hernando, you guys are making a big bet saying, hey, we're going to put together, some podcasts, some great podcasts. And I'll let you know also, as I'm a digital marketing guy, separate from a podcaster, which you could probably tell in the beginning with difficulties. But I buy media time. And when Hernando kind of explained his model, it looked like a way. And then we have a lot of digital marketing folks. So look up Wondery, look up David, look up Hernando. Hernando was also on the show. And it looks like the way you guys are doing it, I don't know if you're going to dive on the business end, but because you're great talent, but what are your thoughts as advertising podcasts as a medium? Because you have you have a ton of advertisers now, because you obviously promote them. So give us, as a medium for not just consuming content, but if you're a content buyer, let's pick up the phone, call Hernando, let's pick up the phone and call Wondery, but give them a little reason as to why, Yeah,
I think that podcasts are more intimate than most any other medium that you can get. And I used to say that radio is the most intimate medium, but the reason I think podcasts are more intimate is because you control it as a user. And I mean, a lot of it is, it's the DVR effect in a sense for the ear. If you're on the subway, or if you're exercising, or if you're at the gym, or if you're doing your own thing and you're doing it solo in particular, that experience, the more personalized it is, the more addicted you are to it. And I mean, it becomes you, it becomes part of your routine. And I think that great podcasts and great podcasters understand that, in a sense, these days with audio, the listener is in control. Now, so for those people, those advertisers who are looking to reach those people who value that experience, what you have to do is you have to talk about your product or whatever it is that you're selling in the context of that intimate level. For instance, like when I talk about the advertisers that I talk about, I'm not just giving you a sales pitch. I mean, usually the advertisers are saying, we want you to try out our product, and we want you to tell people, give an experiential, tell people about our product on an experiential level. Don't just say, oh, this is good because somebody told me to say it's good. Say it's good because you've experienced it, you've lived it. And I think that in a sense is what takes podcasting and that advertising. And I'm not, you're quite right. I'm more on the creative side than I am on the running of the podcast business. But I think that's really the dynamic that's in play for podcast advertising. It's that level of intimacy, and it's how advertisers are trying to reach people at that level. It's literally you're getting inside their head, through their earbuds. It's a remarkable thing. It really is.
Love it. And then so we're gonna wind it down, but before we do, who is David Brown? Where you're from, and you how'd you start your career, and what's next for you? You know, obviously killing a Wondery. So a little bit of background, and feel free to share
Sure.
What you're working on.
Well, let's see. I've been actually in the news business for a long time. Since about 1980 was when I got started in the news business, and
Nice.
I've lived all over the place. I've worked as most of that time in public radio. I've worked in London, and been based in London. I've been based in D.C. I've been based in Los Angeles, in Boston, and I've covered national and international affairs for years. I'm currently in Austin, Texas, and I host a statewide daily public radio program. So it's on all the NPR stations in Texas.
Oh wow!
Used to be the host of Marketplace, which it still is heard nationally. But I moved out here for the quality of life and to start a family. And I'm an attorney, and I just finished my PhD yesterday. Finished.
Congratulations, David.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. So it's been a lot of fun. That's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Nice. I love it. And folks, just a great guy. We're gonna put some links, and just listen to Wondery is the kind of the platform, if you will, and on Wondery by far is Business Wars, and you can just go on the iTunes top business podcast. It's always there, but Google Business Wars, you'll find it. You're here, David. You'll love David. And David, listen, it's kind of funny because I've been very lucky, and I had some pretty important guests on the show, but I have to tell you, this is one of my favorite. Like, I just, how, like, I don't know, who do you admire? Because, like, I just got into podcasting, and I would listen to you, and I got to be candid, and I love Fernando. He's a great guy, and the content is great. But, 50% of the reason, which usually is not as much a host for a story, 50% of the reason because I listen to you. Who are some of the folks that you might admire in the business? Because I'm pretty stoked right now,
Well, I'm kind of, to be honest, that's very kind of you to say. I have to tell you, I don't think I deserve nearly those kinds of accolades. But I will tell you that the people that I admire are the old school newscasters, man. Because to me, those guys taught everybody else how to do it. And when I think back, and most of I don't know how many of your listeners may have heard the name Edward R. Murrow, but you can look it up. And he was the CBS guy, and what he understood back in 1945 was that if you were standing on the rooftop of a London building as the bombs were falling, that you had to describe it and put someone there in that moment. And for me, I'll never be able to do that the way that someone like a giant like Murrow was able to do it. But I think about those cats who were basically writing those rules back then. And, if I can get someone into that moment, get them, kind of to feel or experience that sense of whatever that emotion is, oh, man, I mean, that's everything to me. That's what audio is all about. It's giving a person a sense of you are there, and I think that's what Wondery has done so well, is that they've had this immersive experience that is kind of unique in the podcasting world, I think, anyway. And that's what's so appealing to me about what Hernan did with creation of Business Wars, and that's his baby, really. I mean, he came up with this idea. Kind of, you are right there in the middle of these battles, and you hear the heated back and forth, and you hear the hubris, and you can smell the ink on the paper. That's what you want to do, I think, in audio. So that's, I guess, I look back to the old school, and think, how can I, in a perfect world, how could I put my stamp on this? So I'm so glad to hear that you dig the show, and I hope some of your listeners will check it out and let us know what you think.
I love it. So, David, thank you for being on the podcast, and check out Wondery on Business Wars.
Thanks, man.